When the excavation team broke through the sealed entrance, the temperature dropped 10 degrees instantly. Dr. Anna Petrov felt the cold hit her face like a physical force, carrying with it the scent of something that had been waiting in darkness for millennia. Behind her, Professor Thompson's voice cracked as he whispered into his radio, "We need immediate backup. What we found down here, this changes everything we know about human history." Before we uncover what really happened in that buried chamber, a quick whisper. This channel explores mysteries history tried to bury, lost expeditions, missing people, discoveries that vanished overnight, stories mainstream archaeology won't tell. If you're drawn to secrets the establishment wants forgotten, consider subscribing. Now, back to Dr. Petrov and what happened next in the depths beneath the Valley of the Kings. The morning of October 15th, 1974, started like any other day at the excavation site. Dr. Anna Petrov, a 32-year-old archaeologist from Prague, had been working in Egypt for 3 years as part of an international team studying previously unexplored sections of the Valley of the Kings. The project was funded by a consortium of European universities, with additional backing from the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. Professor David Thompson, the expedition leader, had been feeling optimistic about their progress. They had been methodically working through a section of the valley that preliminary surveys suggested might contain minor tombs or storage chambers. Nothing spectacular was expected, just the careful, painstaking work that makes up 90% of archaeological research. But what they didn't know was that their ground-penetrating radar had detected something extraordinary 3 weeks earlier. Dr. James Harrison, the team's geophysicist, had been puzzled by the readings from grid section 7 Alpha. The data showed a large void approximately 20 meters below the surface, far deeper than any known tomb in the area. More intriguingly, the chamber appeared to be perfectly rectangular, with dimensions that didn't match any known Egyptian architectural patterns. Harrison had mentioned his findings to Thompson during their weekly team meeting, but the professor had been focused on their current excavation and suggested they complete their work on the upper levels before investigating deeper anomalies. It was a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Ahmed Hassan, their local guide and cultural liaison, had expressed uneasiness about the site from the beginning. The 60-year-old Egyptian had worked with archaeological teams for over 3 decades, and he claimed this particular section of the valley felt different. "The ground here remembers," he had told Dr. Petrov one evening as they watched the sunset paint the limestone cliffs gold. "Some things should stay buried." Dr. Petrov had dismissed Hassan's concerns as local superstition, but she would later realize that his warning contained more truth than she could have imagined. The team consisted of 7 members. Thompson as expedition leader, Petrov specializing in hieroglyphic translation, Harrison handling geological surveys, Dr. Elizabeth Crawford from Oxford focusing on pottery and artifacts, Dr. Miguel Santos from Madrid studying burial practices, Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo documenting everything photographically, and Hassan serving as their cultural guide and translator for dealings with local authorities. Each team member brought years of experience to the project, but none of them were prepared for what they would uncover. The breakthrough happened completely by accident. Dr. Santos had been examining what appeared to be a collapsed wall in the southeastern corner of their current excavation when his trowel struck something that shouldn't have been there. Instead of the solid limestone he expected, the tool met no resistance and disappeared into darkness. "Professor Thompson," Santos called out, his voice echoing strangely in the excavation pit. "I think we have a problem here." Thompson climbed down into the dig site and examined the hole Santos had created. When he shined his flashlight into the opening, the beam disappeared into what appeared to be a much larger space below. "Harrison, bring your equipment over here," Thompson ordered. "I want to know exactly what we're looking at." But what the ground-penetrating radar revealed that afternoon defied explanation. The chamber below was massive, roughly 30 meters long, 15 meters wide, and 8 meters high. The walls appeared to be constructed from perfectly cut stone blocks, fitted together with a precision that exceeded anything they had seen in other Egyptian tombs. More puzzling still, the chamber showed no signs of the settling or structural damage that would be expected after 3 millennia underground. Dr. Crawford examined the opening Santos had created and made a disturbing observation. "This wasn't a natural collapse," she announced to the team. "These stones were deliberately sealed from the inside." The implications of her statement hung heavy in the evening air as the team debated their next move. They had discovered something significant, but protocol required them to notify Egyptian authorities before proceeding with any major excavation. Thompson knew that once officials became involved, their small team would likely be replaced by a larger expedition under Egyptian supervision. Yet something about the discovery felt urgent. Hassan had been unusually quiet since the chamber was found, and when Petrov asked him about it, his response chilled her. "This place was sealed for a reason. We should respect that decision." But academic curiosity proved stronger than caution. That night, Thompson made a decision that would change all their lives. He authorized a preliminary exploration of the chamber, telling the team they would take basic measurements and photographs before notifying authorities in the morning. It seemed like a reasonable compromise between scientific discovery and proper procedure. They had no idea they were about to uncover something that would force the Egyptian government to classify their entire expedition. The next morning, October 16th, the team gathered at the excavation site before dawn. Thompson had brought additional lighting equipment and a more powerful generator. Dr. Tanaka prepared her cameras while Harrison set up monitoring equipment to ensure the structural integrity of the chamber below. Dr. Petrov felt in strange anticipation as she prepared her translation materials. If the chamber contained hieroglyphic inscriptions, she would be among the first people in 3,000 years to read them. The thought was both thrilling and sobering. Santos and Crawford worked together to carefully enlarge the opening, removing stones that had sealed the chamber. Each block they moved revealed more evidence that the sealing had been intentional and thorough. Someone had wanted whatever was in that chamber to stay hidden forever. Ahmed Hassan watched their progress with growing unease. "Dr. Thompson," he said quietly, "perhaps we should wait for proper authorization. Some discoveries come with consequences." But Thompson was too focused on the work to heed the warning. "Hassan, I appreciate your concern, but this is exactly the kind of discovery we came here to make. Whatever's down there has been waiting for us for 3 millennia. By 10 o'clock that morning, they had created an opening large enough for a person to enter the chamber safely. Thompson volunteered to be the first to descend, but Petrov convinced him that she should go first in case there were inscriptions that needed immediate documentation. She rappelled down into the chamber with a waterproof flashlight and basic photography equipment. What she saw when her feet touched the floor would be burned into her memory forever. The chamber was unlike anything in her experience. The walls were covered in hieroglyphs, but not in the style of any dynasty she recognized. The symbols seemed to shift and flow in her peripheral vision, creating an optical illusion that made her dizzy. More disturbing still, the hieroglyphs appeared to be carved into the stone from the inside, as if something had been trapped in the chamber and had marked the walls while trying to escape. But what truly shocked her was what occupied the center of the chamber. "Professor Thompson," she called up through the opening, her voice strangely muffled by the stone walls. "You need to see this. All of you need to see this." One by one, the team members descended into the chamber. Each person's reaction followed the same pattern: initial wonder at the scope of the discovery, followed by growing unease as they examined the details more closely. Dr. Crawford was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "This doesn't match any known Egyptian burial practice. The chamber design, the hieroglyphic style, even the stone-cutting technique, none of it fits with established archaeological knowledge." Harrison's equipment readings only deepened the mystery. The chamber showed no evidence of water damage, structural settling, or even normal aging. It was as if the space had been preserved in a perfect vacuum for 3,000 years. Dr. Tanaka began photographing everything systematically, but her camera behaved strangely inside the chamber. Some photographs came out perfectly clear, while others showed inexplicable anomalies, shadows where there should be none, and bright spots that couldn't be explained by her lighting setup. But it was Dr. Petrov's translation work that revealed the most disturbing aspect of their discovery. The hieroglyphs told a story that contradicted everything they knew about ancient Egyptian beliefs and practices. According to the inscriptions, the chamber had been sealed not to protect what was inside, but to protect the outside world from what had been imprisoned within. The text spoke of rituals gone wrong, of boundaries between worlds that had been crossed, and of 7 priests who had volunteered to remain sealed in the chamber to prevent something terrible from escaping. The final inscription, carved near what appeared to be a ritual altar, contained a warning that made Petrov's blood run cold. Should the seals be broken and the chamber opened, let those who enter know that they have undone the work of generations. What was bound here must not be allowed to walk the earth again. She was about to share her translation with the team when Professor Thompson noticed something that made him reach for his radio with trembling hands. The chamber wasn't empty. In the far corner, partially hidden by shadows, lay what appeared to be the mummified remains of 7 individuals. But unlike any mummies they had encountered, these bodies showed no signs of the careful preservation techniques used by ancient Egyptian embalmers. They appeared to have been preserved by the chamber itself. More disturbing still, the bodies were positioned not in the traditional burial pose with arms crossed over the chest, but in postures that suggested they had been trying to claw their way out of the chamber when death claimed them. That's when Thompson made the radio call that would end their expedition forever. Base camp. This is Professor Thompson at Excavation Site 7. We need immediate backup from Egyptian authorities. What we found down here, this changes everything we know about human history. But what none of them realized was that their radio transmission was being monitored by more than just their base camp support team. Within hours, vehicles would arrive carrying officials who demanded that all documentation be surrendered and all team members sign agreements never to discuss their discovery. The chamber would be resealed using modern concrete and steel, and the entire excavation site would be classified as a restricted archaeological zone. But in those final moments before the outside world intervened, Dr. Petrov made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She took one final photograph of the hieroglyphic warning and concealed the film inside her personal equipment. She had no way of knowing that her decision to preserve evidence of their discovery would put her life in danger for decades to come. The afternoon of October 16th brought an unseasonable sandstorm that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Ahmed Hassan watched the approaching wall of dust with growing dread, recognizing patterns in the wind that he had never seen before in his 30 years working in the valley. "This storm is not natural," he whispered to Dr. Crawford as they secured equipment. "The desert is angry about what we have disturbed." Dr. Santos, meanwhile, had made a discovery that would prove even more significant than the chamber itself. While examining the sealed stones they had removed, he noticed that each block bore a small symbol carved into its inner face, symbols that had been hidden when the chamber was sealed. These weren't Egyptian hieroglyphs, but something far older and more primitive. "Dr. Petrov," Santos called from outside the chamber entrance, "I need your expertise on these markings. They don't match anything in our reference materials." When Petrov emerged from the chamber to examine Santos's discovery, she felt her academic confidence begin to crumble. The symbols were unlike anything she had encountered in 15 years of studying ancient languages. They seemed to be a form of proto-writing that predated known Egyptian scripts by millennia. But what truly disturbed her was the way the symbols seemed to respond to her presence. As she traced the carved lines with her finger, the stone grew warm to the touch, and she could swear she heard a faint humming sound emanating from within the rock itself. Dr. Harrison's geological analysis only deepened the mystery. The stones used to seal the chamber were not local limestone, but a type of granite that didn't exist anywhere in Egypt. More puzzling still, radiometric dating suggested the granite was significantly older than the chamber it sealed, by at least 2,000 years. "This makes no sense," Harrison confided to Professor Thompson as they reviewed the data. "According to my equipment, someone used stones that were already ancient when the pyramids were built to seal a chamber that was constructed afterward. The timeline doesn't work." Thompson was beginning to realize that their discovery was far more complex than a simple tomb or storage chamber. The evidence suggested they had uncovered something that challenged fundamental assumptions about ancient Egyptian civilization and possibly human history itself. Inside the chamber, Dr. Tanaka continued her photographic documentation, but she was becoming increasingly frustrated with her equipment's erratic behavior. Her digital camera worked perfectly outside the chamber, but inside it seemed to develop a mind of its own. Some photographs captured details invisible to the naked eye, while others showed strange distortions that couldn't be explained by lighting or lens problems. "Professor," Tanaka called out, her voice echoing strangely in the stone chamber, "you need to see what my camera is picking up on the far wall." The photographs revealed hieroglyphs that weren't visible under normal lighting conditions. Only the camera's flash illuminated symbols that had been carved so faintly they were nearly imperceptible to human vision. These hidden inscriptions told a different story than the obvious markings, one that made Dr. Petrov question everything she thought she knew about ancient Egyptian beliefs. According to the hidden text, the chamber had not been built by Egyptians at all. The inscriptions described the discovery of the space by Egyptian priests, who had been drawn to the site by voices in the earth that called to them in dreams. The priests had found the chamber already sealed, but had broken the ancient bindings out of curiosity about what lay within. What they found inside had terrified them so completely that they had immediately begun working to reseal the chamber, using both Egyptian techniques and older methods described in texts that were ancient even to them. The work had taken 7 years to complete, and 7 priests had volunteered to remain sealed inside to ensure that the bindings would hold. But the most chilling part of the hidden inscription was its final warning. "We are the 7 who chose to remain. Should others come after us and break these seals again, know that each opening weakens the barriers between worlds. What was bound here grows stronger with each generation, and our sacrifice may not be enough to contain it forever." Dr. Crawford's analysis of the 7 mummified figures revealed details that contradicted everything they knew about ancient Egyptian burial practices. The bodies showed no evidence of traditional mummification techniques, no removal of organs, no natron treatment, no wrapping in linen. Instead, they appeared to have been preserved by environmental conditions within the chamber itself. More disturbing still, the positioning of the bodies suggested they had not died peacefully. 3 of the figures were found near the chamber's sealed entrance, their hands worn to bone from clawing at the stone. 2 others were positioned around what appeared to be a ritual altar, as if they had been conducting some kind of ceremony when death claimed them. The remaining 2 figures were found in the chamber's center, their arms raised toward the ceiling in poses that suggested either supplication or horror. But what truly shocked Crawford was the condition of the chamber floor around the bodies. The stone showed evidence of extensive wear patterns, as if the 7 individuals had spent years pacing the same paths around the chamber's perimeter. Whatever had happened here, it had taken a very long time to unfold. Ahmed Hassan refused to enter the chamber after the discovery of the bodies. "These were not burials," he explained to Thompson with obvious distress. "These were imprisonments. The 7 chose to lock themselves away from the world, but something else was locked away with them." As the afternoon wore on, each team member began experiencing unusual phenomena that they initially dismissed as products of stress and excitement. Dr. Santos reported hearing whispered conversations in languages he didn't recognize. Harrison's equipment began detecting electromagnetic anomalies that had no apparent source. Crawford found herself becoming irrationally anxious whenever she turned her back on the mummified figures. Dr. Petrov experienced the most disturbing effects. As she worked to translate more of the chamber's inscriptions, she began to understand words and symbols that she had never encountered before. The knowledge seemed to flow directly into her mind, as if something in the chamber was teaching her ancient languages that predated human civilization. The sensation was both exhilarating and terrifying. She was gaining access to information that could revolutionize understanding of human history, but the knowledge came with an overwhelming sense of dread that grew stronger with each translation. By late afternoon, even Professor Thompson was beginning to question the wisdom of their continued exploration. The chamber's effects on his team were becoming impossible to ignore, and the implications of their discovery were far beyond anything they were equipped to handle as a small archaeological expedition. That's when Dr. Tanaka's camera captured something that would haunt all of them forever. While photographing the ritual altar in the chamber's center, her camera's flash revealed something that hadn't been visible before. Carved into the altar's surface was a detailed map showing the locations of 6 other sealed chambers scattered across Egypt and the surrounding regions. Each location was marked with the same primitive symbols they had found on the sealing stones, and each was connected to the others by lines that formed a complex geometric pattern. "My God," Thompson whispered as he studied the photograph. "This isn't just one chamber, it's part of a network." The realization that they had discovered not an isolated tomb but a component of some vast ancient system changed everything. If the map was accurate, there were 6 other sites containing chambers similar to the one they had opened, and if the warnings carved into the walls were true, each site contained something that earlier civilizations had deemed too dangerous to leave unsealed. As evening approached and the unnatural sandstorm continued to rage above ground, the team made a discovery that would force them to abandon their excavation immediately. Dr. Petrov was completing her translation of the altar inscriptions when she realized that the geometric pattern connecting the 7 chamber locations wasn't random. The lines formed a precise mathematical figure that generated specific coordinates that when calculated pointed to a location in the center of the pattern. That location was less than 50 kilometers from their current position. According to the ancient inscriptions, the 7 chambers were not prisons but anchors, each containing part of something that had been deliberately fragmented and hidden to prevent its reassembly. The central location marked on the map was where the fragments were meant to be reunited, and where something called the convergence would take place. The inscriptions were unclear about what the convergence would accomplish, but they were explicit about one thing: it would fundamentally alter the relationship between the physical world and what they termed the spaces between spaces. As Dr. Petrov shared her translation with the team, they began to understand that their discovery had implications far beyond archaeology. They had stumbled upon evidence of ancient knowledge that challenged basic assumptions about reality itself. That's when Ahmed Hassan noticed something that made him grab his radio and call for immediate evacuation. The 7 mummified figures had moved. Not dramatically, just subtle shifts in position that might have been dismissed as settling or imagination if not for the detailed photographs Tanaka had taken earlier. Comparison of the images showed that each body had turned slightly toward the chamber's center, as if responding to some unseen stimulus. "We need to leave," Hassan announced with quiet authority. "Whatever we have awakened here is becoming stronger, and we do not have the knowledge or tools to control it." But before they could begin their retreat from the chamber, they heard something that froze them all in place. The sound of stone grinding against stone, coming from somewhere deep beneath the chamber floor. Something else was stirring in the depths below. The sound from beneath the chamber floor continued for exactly 47 seconds before falling silent. Dr. Harrison's seismic equipment recorded the vibrations, and what he saw on his instruments made him question everything he understood about geology. The readings showed movement patterns that suggested something massive was shifting in spaces that his ground-penetrating radar insisted didn't exist. "According to my equipment, there's nothing but solid rock for 50 meters below us," Harrison whispered to Professor Thompson, his voice tight with confusion. "But something down there just moved, and it moved deliberately." The team's decision to evacuate was interrupted by the arrival of vehicles that none of them had expected. Through the entrance to their excavation site, they could see military trucks and black sedans pulling up to their base camp. Men in civilian clothes were already examining their equipment and confiscating their communication devices. Ahmed Hassan recognized the officials immediately. "Egyptian Intelligence Service," he murmured to Thompson. "Someone has been monitoring our radio transmissions. They know what we found." Dr. Petrov realized with growing panic that the photograph she had hidden contained evidence that could revolutionize understanding of human history or get her killed if the wrong people discovered it. She made a split-second decision that would define the rest of her life, concealing the film canister inside a geological sample container that Harrison had collected earlier. But what the team didn't realize was that their discovery had attracted attention from sources far beyond the Egyptian government. Dr. Elizabeth Crawford was the first to notice the unmarked helicopter circling their position. Unlike the Egyptian military vehicles, this aircraft bore no national insignia and maintained a distance that suggested surveillance rather than immediate intervention. Someone else was very interested in what they had uncovered. Inside the chamber, Dr. Tanaka continued photographing despite the approaching officials. Her academic instincts told her to document everything possible before their access was terminated. But her camera had begun capturing images that defied explanation, photographs showing details that weren't visible to the naked eye, and shadows that fell in directions that contradicted her lighting setup. One photograph in particular would haunt her dreams for years to come. The image showed the ritual altar from an angle that should have been impossible given her position when she took the shot. More disturbing still, the photograph revealed a figure standing behind the altar, a shadowy presence that none of them had seen while in the chamber. The figure appeared to be one of the 7 mummified priests, but it was standing upright and seemed to be gesturing towards something beyond the camera's frame. The timestamp on the photograph confirmed it had been taken just minutes earlier, while all 7 bodies were still lying motionless on the chamber floor. Professor Thompson made the decision to surrender their documentation to Egyptian authorities rather than risk imprisonment or worse. But before they could begin their ascent from the chamber, Dr. Santos made a discovery that changed everything they thought they knew about their situation. While examining the wall behind the ritual altar, Santos found a section of stone that moved when pressed. The hidden panel revealed a narrow passage leading deeper into the earth, a passage that didn't appear on any of Harrison's surveys. More importantly, the passage showed signs of recent use. "Someone else has been here," Santos announced to the team, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "These footprints in the dust are no more than a few weeks old." The implications were staggering. If someone else knew about the chamber and had been accessing it secretly, then their discovery was part of a much larger operation. The question was whether that someone was working with or against the authorities who were now surrounding their excavation site. Dr. Petrov examined the footprints more closely and made a disturbing observation. The impressions showed that at least 3 different individuals had used the passage, and they had been carrying heavy equipment. Drag marks in the dust suggested they had removed something substantial from the deeper chambers. But what truly alarmed her was the discovery of modern climbing equipment, hidden in an alcove near the passage entrance. The gear was high quality and recently manufactured, indicating that whoever had been using the passage had resources and planning capabilities far beyond their small academic expedition. Ahmed Hassan's growing agitation finally reached a breaking point. "Professor Thompson, we must leave immediately. This place has been compromised, and we are not the only ones interested in what lies beneath. Some knowledge is too dangerous to possess." The sound of voices from above indicated that Egyptian officials were beginning their descent into the excavation site. The team had perhaps 10 minutes before their access to the chamber would be terminated permanently. Thompson made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. "Crawford, Santos, take the passage and document whatever's down there. The rest of us will delay the officials as long as possible. This may be our only chance to understand what we've really discovered." But what Crawford and Santos found in the deeper chambers would prove that some discoveries are too terrible to document. The passage led to a series of smaller chambers, each one containing evidence of activities that had nothing to do with ancient Egyptian burial practices. Modern excavation equipment was stacked in organized piles, and computer terminals displayed data that suggested ongoing monitoring of the site for several years. Most disturbing of all was the discovery of a laboratory setup in the deepest chamber, complete with scientific equipment for analyzing biological samples. Specimens were stored in refrigerated containers, and detailed charts tracked measurements and observations that appeared to be monitoring some kind of biological activity. Dr. Crawford examined the laboratory notes and felt her academic worldview crumble. The documentation described experiments conducted on tissue samples taken from the 7 mummified figures. According to the notes, the samples showed cellular activity that defied conventional understanding of biology. The tissue was not only preserved but actually growing, regenerating itself in ways that should have been impossible. But what terrified Crawford most was the notation in the margin of the most recent report: regeneration rate increasing exponentially since chamber breach. Recommend immediate termination of subject containment protocols. Santos discovered files that revealed the true scope of what they had stumbled into. The hidden chambers contained detailed maps of all 7 sites mentioned in the ancient inscriptions, along with satellite photographs and geological surveys indicating that each location was under active surveillance. More alarming still were the personnel files documenting teams of archaeologists and scientists who had discovered similar chambers over the past 50 years. Each file contained detailed psychological profiles and, in many cases, termination reports indicating that the individuals had died in accidents or disappeared under mysterious circumstances. "My God, Elizabeth," Santos whispered as he read through the files. "We're not the first team to find one of these chambers, and according to these records, none of the previous discoverers lived more than 2 years after their excavation." The files revealed a conspiracy that spanned decades and involved government agencies from multiple countries. The 7 chambers were not ancient mysteries waiting to be discovered. They were active containment facilities that required constant monitoring and maintenance. The occasional accidental discovery by academic teams served as a cover for more extensive operations conducted by personnel with security clearances far above their level. But the most chilling revelation was contained in a folder marked Convergence Protocol. The documents described a plan to deliberately breach all 7 chambers simultaneously, allowing whatever had been fragmented and imprisoned to reunite at the central coordinates identified in the ancient inscriptions. According to the files, the Convergence Protocol had been in development for over 30 years, with various government and private organizations contributing resources and expertise. The ultimate goal was described in terms that seemed to blend cutting-edge physics with concepts that bordered on the supernatural. The plan involved using the energy released during the convergence to access what the documents termed parallel dimensional spaces, regions of reality that existed alongside the physical world but were normally inaccessible to human consciousness. The potential applications for military and intelligence purposes were considered revolutionary. Crawford and Santos realized with growing horror that their excavation had not been an accident. Their team had been deliberately guided to this location as part of a larger experiment. The international funding, the convenient permits, even their selection as team members, everything had been orchestrated to ensure they would discover and breach the chamber at precisely the right time. But what the orchestrators of the plan hadn't anticipated was the human cost of their experiment. Dr. Crawford found medical files documenting the effects of chamber exposure on previous research teams. The symptoms began with enhanced linguistic abilities and increased intuitive understanding of ancient cultures. Subjects reported vivid dreams featuring historical periods they had never studied and knowledge of languages they had never encountered. But the initial benefits quickly gave way to more disturbing changes. Subjects began experiencing what the files termed dimensional bleeding, brief periods where they could perceive events occurring in parallel realities. These episodes became more frequent and intense over time, ultimately leading to complete psychological breakdown as the subjects lost the ability to distinguish between different versions of reality. The final stage of exposure was described in clinical terms that barely concealed the horror of what was being documented. Subjects entered a state called convergence psychosis, where their consciousness began to fragment across multiple dimensional spaces simultaneously. Death typically occurred when the subject's awareness became so dispersed that their physical body could no longer maintain basic life functions. Santos discovered security footage from previous chamber excavations that showed the progression of symptoms in real time. The videos were difficult to watch, showing respected academics and scientists gradually losing their grip on reality as exposure to the chamber's influence took its toll. But the most disturbing footage showed what happened to research teams that stayed in proximity to open chambers for extended periods. The videos documented subjects beginning to exhibit behaviors that suggested they were responding to stimuli that weren't visible to cameras or other observers. Conversations with entities that weren't there, reactions to sounds that recording equipment couldn't detect, and movements that seemed to be guided by invisible forces. The final video in the collection showed the fate of the previous team to breach this particular chamber. Dr. Crawford recognized the chamber's distinctive wall markings, confirming that other researchers had been here before them. The footage showed a team of 6 researchers who had been exploring the chamber for 3 days when something went catastrophically wrong. The video began normally, with team members conducting routine documentation work. But over the course of several hours, their behavior became increasingly erratic. They began speaking in unison, reciting phrases in languages that linguistic experts had been unable to identify. Their movements became synchronized, as if they were being controlled by some external force. The footage ended abruptly when all 6 team members simultaneously turned toward the camera and began walking forward in perfect unison. Their eyes were completely white, and their faces bore expressions of absolute terror, even as their bodies moved against their will. According to the file notes, none of the 6 researchers were ever seen again. Their bodies were never recovered from the chamber despite extensive searches. The only trace of their presence was found carved into the chamber wall in their own handwriting. "We are the bridge between worlds. The 7 have shown us the path. The convergence comes." Crawford and Santos realized that their own team was exhibiting early symptoms of the same progression. Dr. Petrov's enhanced translation abilities, Harrison's detection of impossible geological phenomena, and Tanaka's photographs of things that weren't visible to normal perception, all were signs that their exposure to the chamber was already affecting them in ways they didn't fully understand. But what terrified them most was the realization that the effects were accelerating. According to the medical files, previous teams had taken weeks to show significant symptoms. Their own team was displaying advanced effects after only 2 days of exposure. Something about this particular chamber was different from the others, more powerful, more dangerous, and more eager to bridge the gap between worlds. As Crawford and Santos prepared to return to the main chamber with their devastating discoveries, they heard something that made them freeze in absolute terror. From somewhere in the depths below the laboratory, they could hear voices speaking in perfect unison, 7 voices chanting in a language that predated human civilization. The voices belonged to the mummified priests, and they were no longer dead. Above them in the main chamber, Dr. Petrov was experiencing the full horror of her enhanced linguistic abilities. She could now understand every inscription on the chamber walls, including warnings that became more desperate and terrified as they approached the chamber's center. The final inscriptions, carved by the 7 priests during their last days of consciousness, told a story that made her question everything she believed about the nature of reality. The priests had not volunteered to be sealed in the chamber to prevent something from escaping. They had been chosen as vessels, their consciousness gradually displaced by entities from the spaces between worlds. The sealing of the chamber was meant to prevent these entities from using the priests' bodies to return to the physical realm. But the seals were never meant to last forever. They were temporary containment measures, designed to hold until someone could find a permanent solution to the threat. The 7 chambers scattered across Egypt and surrounding regions were all part of the same containment system, each one holding fragments of a consciousness that existed outside normal space and time. The entities trapped within the chambers had been waiting patiently for centuries, gradually weakening the seals through pure force of will. Each time a chamber was breached by modern researchers, the entities gained access to new knowledge and capabilities, learning about the contemporary world through the minds of their discoverers. Dr. Petrov realized with dawning horror that her ability to translate the ancient inscriptions wasn't a natural linguistic skill. It was the result of one of the entities sharing its knowledge with her, using her mind as a window into the modern world. Every translation she completed gave the entity more information about current technology, politics, and scientific understanding. She was being used as a spy against her own species. The sound of approaching footsteps from the passage below indicated that Crawford and Santos were returning. But when they emerged from the hidden entrance, their expressions carried news that would force the entire team to confront the true scope of their situation. "We have to get out of here immediately," Crawford announced, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "This entire operation has been planned for decades, and we're not researchers, we're test subjects." But even as she spoke, the sound of grinding stone resumed from deep beneath the chamber floor. This time, however, The noise was accompanied by something that made Hassan grab his radio and begin transmitting distress calls in Arabic. Light was beginning to emanate from cracks in the chamber floor, a cold blue radiance that had no identifiable source and cast shadows that moved independently of any physical objects. The convergence had begun, and they were trapped at ground zero of an event that would fundamentally alter the relationship between their world and the spaces that existed beyond human perception. The blue light emanating from the chamber floor intensified with each passing second, casting everything in an otherworldly glow that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Dr. Harrison's instruments began registering energy readings that exceeded his equipment's measurement capabilities, while electromagnetic interference rendered all their communication devices useless. Ahmed Hassan was the first to understand what was happening. His grandfather had been a keeper of oral traditions that predated written Egyptian history. Stories passed down through generations about the time when the boundaries grew thin, and otherworldly entities had walked among humans. The blue light matched descriptions from those ancient tales. "The 7 seals are breaking," Hassan announced with grim certainty. "What was fragmented is becoming whole again. We have perhaps minutes before the entities achieve full manifestation in our world." Professor Thompson tried desperately to reach Egyptian authorities on his radio, but every frequency carried only static punctuated by whispered voices speaking in languages that hurt to hear. The voices seemed to be coordinating something, counting down in mathematical progressions that corresponded to the pulsing of the blue light. Dr. Petrov felt the entity's presence in her mind growing stronger by the moment. Her consciousness was being slowly displaced as something ancient and alien claimed more territory within her thoughts. She could feel her personality fragmenting, parts of her memory being rewritten to serve purposes she couldn't comprehend. But in her final moments of autonomous thought, she made a decision that would prove crucial to humanity's survival. Using the enhanced linguistic abilities the entity had granted her, she began carving a warning into the chamber wall, not in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, but in modern languages that future discoverers would understand immediately. The warning read, "Convergence incomplete. 6 chambers remain sealed. Destroy this site before entities achieve full manifestation. Trust no government authority. They are compromised." Dr. Tanaka's camera continued functioning despite the electromagnetic interference, but the images it captured showed reality beginning to break down at a fundamental level. Her photographs revealed multiple versions of the chamber existing simultaneously, as if different dimensional spaces were bleeding through into their reality. In some images, the chamber appeared as they had first discovered it, with 7 mummified figures lying motionless on the floor. In others, the same space showed signs of extensive modern excavation with equipment they had never seen. Most disturbing of all were the photographs showing the chamber filled with figures in contemporary clothing, researchers from different time periods all occupying the same space simultaneously. The temporal distortions were becoming visible to the naked eye. Dr. Santos watched in horror as multiple versions of himself flickered in and out of existence, each one representing a different potential timeline. Some versions appeared to be working cooperatively with the entities, while others were clearly fighting against possession. The boundaries between past, present, and future were dissolving. Dr. Crawford discovered that the laboratory equipment in the deeper chambers was now operating autonomously, conducting experiments and analyses without human operators. The computers displayed data streams that tracked the progress of the convergence across all 7 chamber sites simultaneously. According to the displays, 5 of the other chambers had already been breached within the past 72 hours. Teams of researchers at each location were experiencing the same phenomenon they were witnessing: reality breakdown, entity possession, and dimensional bleeding. The coordination was too precise to be coincidental. "This was planned," Crawford announced to the team, her voice barely audible over the increasing intensity of the otherworldly humming. "Someone or something has been orchestrating simultaneous breaches across all 7 sites. We're not dealing with an accident. This is a carefully executed invasion." The files in the laboratory revealed the horrifying truth about the convergence protocol. The plan hadn't been developed by human governments seeking to access parallel dimensions for military advantage. It had been guided by the entities themselves, working through possessed individuals over decades to ensure their eventual release. Every researcher who had been exposed to the chambers had become an unwitting agent of the entity's agenda. Their enhanced abilities and knowledge came at the cost of gradual mental colonization, turning them into tools for advancing the convergence timeline. The scientific breakthroughs, the funding decisions, even the selection of excavation sites, all had been influenced by entity manipulation. Dr. Harrison made a discovery that revealed the true scope of the threat they were facing. His seismic equipment detected synchronized vibrations occurring at precise intervals across the entire African continent. The pattern suggested that something massive was stirring beneath the Earth's surface, responding to the energy being released by the chamber breaches. Whatever was fragmented and sealed in these chambers wasn't just consciousness, Harrison realized with growing dread. It was parts of something physical, something so large that it required continental-scale containment measures. The ancient inscriptions that Dr. Petrov had translated took on new and terrifying meaning. The references to spaces between spaces weren't metaphorical descriptions of parallel dimensions. They were literal descriptions of the vast entity that existed in the gaps between atomic structures, in the quantum spaces that conventional physics treated as empty vacuum. The entity was essentially a living embodiment of the dark matter that comprised most of the universe, a consciousness that existed in the spaces between conventional matter and energy. The 7 fragments sealed in the chambers were anchor points, pieces of the entity's awareness that had been trapped in physical form to prevent it from achieving coherent manifestation in normal space-time. But as the fragments began to reconnect, reality itself was being rewritten to accommodate the entity's presence. The blue light wasn't just illumination, it was visible evidence of space-time being restructured at a fundamental level. Ahmed Hassan recognized the symptoms from the oral traditions his grandfather had preserved. The entity seeks to make our world compatible with its own nature, he explained to the team. It cannot exist fully in our reality as it currently exists, so it must transform our reality to match its requirements. The transformation process would be gradual but irreversible. Physical laws would change to accommodate forms of matter and energy that didn't exist in normal space-time. Biological organisms would be restructured to serve as vessels for fragments of the entity's consciousness. The distinction between individual minds would disappear as all awareness merged into a single collective intelligence. Humanity would effectively cease to exist as a distinct species, becoming instead components of a vast, distributed consciousness that spanned multiple dimensions simultaneously. Dr. Petrov's struggle against the entity in her mind provided crucial insights into their adversary's capabilities and limitations. The entity was incredibly powerful within its own dimensional space, but its ability to operate in normal reality was constrained by the physical laws that governed conventional matter. The chambers served as interface points where the entity could gradually adapt pieces of itself to function within normal space-time. But the process required time and energy, making the entity vulnerable during the transition period. If the convergence could be interrupted before completion, the entity might be forced back into its fragmented state. But stopping the convergence would require destroying the physical anchor points, the 7 chambers, and everything connected to them. The explosion would need to be powerful enough to disrupt the quantum-level structures that the entity was using to bridge between dimensional spaces. Dr. Santos realized that the modern equipment in the deeper chambers included materials that could serve their purpose. The laboratory contained radioactive isotopes being used for dating geological samples, along with chemical compounds for analysis work. Combined properly, they could create an explosion sufficient to collapse the entire chamber system. But the sacrifice required was enormous. Someone would need to remain behind to ensure the detonation sequence completed successfully, and the explosion would likely be detected by monitoring stations across Egypt. The surviving team members would face interrogation and possibly imprisonment by authorities who were already compromised by entity influence. Professor Thompson made the decision that would define his legacy. "I'll stay behind and handle the detonation. The rest of you need to escape and warn the outside world about what's happening here. Document everything, but trust no one in positions of authority."
Dr. Tanaka volunteered to remain with Thompson, arguing that her photographic evidence would be crucial for convincing skeptical audiences. Someone needs to witness and record what happens during the detonation. The world needs to understand what we're really fighting against.
But as they prepared to implement their desperate plan, the 7 mummified figures began to move with increasing coordination. The ancient priests were no longer simply possessed. They were becoming avatars of the entity's will, their bodies restructured to serve as conduits for otherworldly energy. The priests began to speak in unison, their voices harmonizing in frequencies that seemed to bypass normal hearing and resonate directly within the team's minds. The words they spoke weren't in any human language, but somehow the meaning was clear. The convergence was 90% complete, and their sacrifice would merely delay the inevitable. According to the entity's communication, the other 6 chamber sites had achieved successful integration. The fragments of consciousness sealed at those locations had already merged with the primary entity, providing it with the energy and knowledge needed to complete its manifestation. Their chamber was the final piece of the puzzle, but its destruction would only force the entity to find alternative methods of achieving full presence in their reality. The entity offered them a choice that was no choice at all: accept possession willingly and retain some degree of individual awareness within the collective consciousness, or resist and face gradual mental dissolution as their reality was transformed around them. Dr. Petrov, still fighting the entity's influence within her mind, discovered a crucial piece of information that changed everything they thought they knew about their situation. The entity wasn't lying about the other chamber sites being compromised, but it was concealing the full truth about its vulnerabilities. The convergence required not just the reunification of the 7 fragments, but also the presence of human consciousness to serve as interpreters between the entity's multidimensional awareness and the linear reality of normal space-time. Humans were essential components of the bridging process, not merely witnesses to it. If all the human interpreters at a chamber site were eliminated before the local convergence completed, the entity would lose its ability to maintain stable presence in that location. The process would reverse, forcing the entity fragment back into its sealed state. "We're not just witnesses or victims," Petrov announced to the team with her final moments of autonomous thought. "We're batteries. The entity needs our consciousness to power its manifestation in our reality. If we die, it loses anchor in normal space-time." The realization transformed their suicide mission from a desperate act of defiance into a calculated strategy with real potential for success. But the implementation would require perfect timing and absolute commitment. Any hesitation or partial success would simply provide the entity with wounded interpreters rather than eliminating them entirely. Ahmed Hassan volunteered to handle the detonation himself, arguing that his knowledge of local geography would help him position the explosives for maximum effect. "I have no family, no career to protect. My grandfather's stories prepared me for this moment. Let an old desert guide finish what ancient priests began." But Dr. Crawford made an observation that revealed an alternative approach to their desperate situation. The laboratory equipment included communication devices that operated on frequencies different from conventional radio. The entities were jamming normal electromagnetic spectra, but they might not be blocking quantum entanglement communication systems used for secure government transmissions. If they could reach uncompromised military authorities and provide precise coordinates for the chamber network, a coordinated nuclear strike on all 7 sites might be possible. The explosions would need to be simultaneous to prevent the entity from shifting its primary manifestation point to an undamaged location. Dr. Harrison worked frantically to modify the quantum communication system while the rest of the team prepared their backup plan. The blue light was now so intense that looking directly at the chamber floor caused permanent vision damage, and the temperature was dropping rapidly as normal thermodynamic laws ceased to function properly. The quantum communicator finally achieved contact with what appeared to be an automated military monitoring system. Harrison transmitted their coordinates along with technical data about the entity's dimensional bridging process and the urgency of immediate nuclear response. But the reply they received chilled them more than the supernatural cold now filling the chamber. Convergence Protocol authorized by Executive Order 774. Your site designated as primary manifestation point. Maintain position for entity integration procedures. The highest levels of government weren't trying to stop the convergence. They were facilitating it. Dr. Santos realized that their quantum communication had been intercepted by the same compromised authorities who had orchestrated the chamber breaches. Worse still, their transmission had provided the entity with real-time information about military communication protocols and nuclear response capabilities. They had inadvertently given their enemy complete intelligence about humanity's most powerful defensive systems. With all hope of external rescue eliminated, the team activated their explosive devices and prepared for the final confrontation. But as the countdown began, something unexpected happened that would determine the fate of both their reality and the entity seeking to claim it. Dr. Petrov, in her last act of human consciousness, used her enhanced linguistic abilities to rewrite the chamber's binding inscriptions. Instead of maintaining the seals that had failed to contain the entity, she carved new symbols that would invert the dimensional bridging process. Rather than allowing the entity to manifest fully in their reality, the modified inscriptions would pull everything within the chamber's influence into the entity's home dimension. The effect would be instantaneous and irreversible. Everything touched by the blue light would be translated into a form of existence incompatible with normal space-time. The entity, caught off guard by this unexpected reversal, found itself pulling the very anchor points it needed for manifestation into a dimensional space where they couldn't function. The convergence process began to collapse as the physical foundations of its bridging attempt were removed from normal reality. As the explosives detonated and the chamber system collapsed, reality snapped back to its normal configuration like a rubber band released from extreme tension. The blue light vanished, the temperature returned to normal, and the oppressive sense of otherworldly presence lifted from the excavation site. But the cost of victory was absolute. Everyone who had been within the chamber's influence during the dimensional translation was gone, pulled into a realm of existence where human consciousness couldn't survive. Dr. Petrov, Professor Thompson, Dr. Tanaka, Ahmed Hassan, Dr. Crawford, Dr. Santos, and Dr. Harrison had sacrificed not just their lives, but their very existence, to save their reality from transformation. The explosion brought Egyptian authorities and international observers rushing to the site, but they found only a collapsed excavation and no trace of the research team. Official reports attributed the incident to a gas pocket explosion that had unfortunately claimed the lives of 7 dedicated researchers. The chamber network was quietly sealed, and the sites redesignated as geological hazard zones. The files documenting the convergence protocol were classified beyond any normal security level, accessible only to a select few who would ensure that such an excavation would never be attempted again. But in research institutions around the world, scientists occasionally report strange dreams featuring ancient chambers and otherworldly entities. These individuals invariably develop enhanced abilities in their fields of study, making breakthrough discoveries that advance human knowledge in unprecedented ways. They never realize that their inspiration comes from fragments of consciousness that escape the dimensional translation, pieces of their colleagues' awareness that continue to exist in the spaces between realities, forever standing guard against the entity that still waits in the dark matter between atoms, patient and eternal in its desire to bridge the gap between worlds. The 7 archaeologists who found the chamber in Egypt in 1974 saved humanity from a fate worse than extinction, but their victory came at a price that echoes through dimensions, a sacrifice that continues to protect our reality from forces that exist beyond human comprehension. And in the quantum spaces where consciousness touches the infinite, they continue their work, ensuring that some boundaries remain forever sealed.